You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. This is an age when every expert, most politicians, and a growing number of grassroots people preach regional thinking. Almost every one of those people also talk about the absolute need to keep the regional center, the city of Cincinnati, healthy and strong. Yet many observers are discouraged by the constant infighting and carping, not to mention the erratic actions of city council. That environment seems perfect for non-incumbent candidates who want to throw the bums out. And that's who we'll be talking to this week. 4 non-incumbents who seem to have the best chance to win on November the 2nd. We begin this morning in the first half of the show with Kaye Britton, a Democratic candidate making her second run for a seat on council. Kaye is a realtor. Joining Kaye is DeWine, a Republican candidate who is making his first run for a council seat. Pat is also an attorney locally here and does corporate law, if I'm mistaken. Is that right?
Litigation.
Litigation. Okay. Thank you. Welcome to Newsmakers. Kaye, welcome back.
Thank you.
Kaye, this time, 1999, what is your top priority if you become a member of council?
Well, I think the one thing that should be a priority for all the persons running for city council is to elect a council that's willing to work together to ensure that they can continue the progress of Cincinnati for everyone. That's critical. I think council today is not working together. They all have their different agendas.
Concretely, what will you do that's different than, they all say that. All of you guys say that. I have to sit and listen to all of you. Everybody says we got to work together.
Yes.
What will you do to change the dynamic, change the atmosphere down there?
I would use my consensus building skills to have a harmonious atmosphere on council. And I think with that, as a realtor, you have a buyer and a seller, and you bring the two together, and you have some sort of consensus building skills, which I have. And I think that with those sort of skills that I bring to council, we'll have a harmonious atmosphere that will be willing to be the kind of the wedge to make people work, not make them, but have them to sort of work together.
Okay. Pat, what about you? What would be your top priority if you're elected?
Dan, what I really want to do is get council back to basics. There's something wrong when our city council can spend money on things like executive health clubs and beauty schools and can't spend money to take care of provide basic city services like taking care of our streets and roads, getting the litter picked up off the streets.
Yeah, and why in your mind has that sort of shift taken place? Why have, there was a lot of controversy this past year over the budget, and especially the supplemental budget, the special budget, and some of the things you just mentioned. Why do you think that's happening?
I'll be honest with you, Dan. I think it's because council members are more concerned about doing favors for some of their friends than looking out for the best interest of the city as a whole. We have to put the interest of the city as a whole ahead of our own personal and political agendas.
Okay, other people have told me that when they've looked at this, Charlie Lucan, for example, said that the budget to repair streets, potholes, the budget to clean streets, whatever you look at, these basic services have declined while these other issues have come up. Do you agree with that? Do you see that as a problem?
I really don't see it as a problem. It was quite interesting enough. They've had an orientation this time for non-incumbent candidates down at John Shari provided it at the direction of Tyrone Yates, and Pat and I both were there. And it really gives you, excuse me, a better understanding of how things work as far as the budget. Pardon me. But they had a lot of people from departments of in City Hall, and I didn't see that was really an issue. They had the budget, and they showed exactly where all the money goes for all the different heads of departments.
But how do you feel about some of the decisions made by council at that policy level about some of the special programs that got funded this past year?
Well, some of the special programs that got funded, I think that there should have been a better way of using those funds.
Okay. You mentioned John Shirey. If you're elected, what's your view about the effectiveness of John Shirey as a city manager and would you like to see him stay?
The question normally people ask, what kind of grade would you give him?
Okay, I'll ask that.
And I'll give him a C. But I think it's also important that we have to understand that you can't be any better than the people that you're working with. I've had a better respect for him based on the information that I received at the orientation. Now, and it wasn't a bias.
In the sense that you had a chance to interact with him personally and maybe got a different view of him?
No. No, I already knew him personally. No, to get an idea of what the sort of things that he's actually responsible for. And he has a tremendous amount of responsibility for the city, along with the heading the city departments and the department heads. And listening to those things, I can see, even with the discretionary funds when it comes to the budget, I can see where he could have had a difficult time when there's, as Pat said, other agendas that council people have.
Pat, what do you feel about John Shirey? And if you are elected to council, what grade do you give him, and do you want him to stay?
Right. I am not satisfied with the performance of the city manager, but I'll tell you, the real problem there is not the city manager. The real problem is the city council that's not doing its job. And that job in our form of government is providing the city manager with leadership and direction and giving the city manager the support that he or she needs. I haven't made a decision about how I will vote.
What is it about, okay, council's a problem, but you said you're not happy with Shirey either. What is it specifically about Shirey that you're not happy with?
I'm very dissatisfied about the unwillingness of the city administration to go out and try to make tough cuts in the budget so we can deal with some of these basic issues. To give you an example, Dan, the last budget proposed by the city manager was 8% higher than the previous budget, even though inflation was 1% last year and 1.7% the year before. Council went ahead and added $17 million to that budget, but even the city manager's budget did not start in the right place, and I don't think it's focused enough on providing basic city services. The city manager, for example, cut funds for picking up the trash off the streets.
There's a lot of things on the city's plate right now. Convention Center, the Rouse Commission's view of the riverfront, new park at the riverfront, neighborhood things, Swifton Commons, a lot of things that people want the city to put funding into. What is it that you think are the top priorities in terms of major capital investments that should have money put into them, and things that you think we shouldn't be putting money into? Pat?
Right. The role of city government, I think, ought to be fairly simple, Dan, is to provide basic city services and do so as efficiently as possible to taxpayers. I think some of these capital projects make some sense and
Which ones?
Will pay off for the city. I think certainly we've made a big commitment to the riverfront with the stadiums. We have to make sure that project's done right. I think the convention center will be a useful asset to downtown. I am not happy with the way it was funded by council, spending $51 million on it without considering in the context of the budget as a whole.
So you would rather they had not appropriated or committed to that?
Well, here's what happened, Dan. I mean, we have all these projects that people want to fund. There's the riverfront, there's light rail, there's the convention center, there's all these neighborhood projects. What council did was, on a by-leave, without any kind of public discussion, without considering the convention center in the context of these other budgets, you simply voted to spend $51 million. I would not have done that.
Okay. Kaye, in terms of those big capital investments, which ones do you see as worth the investment, and which ones would you back away from?
Well, I believe that we need to do the expansion of the convention center, and I think that if we are going to compete with other cities our size to get convention business, then we need to have the expansion of the convention center. I do like the proposal they have for the riverfront. When you come into Cincinnati from Kentucky into Cincinnati, the first thing you see is our riverfront, and it really needs to be developed and to look well, especially since we have these two stadiums there. So we need to do something to aesthetically to make that.
Do you like what you saw in the Rouse Commission report?
Yes, I do.
Do you like the pardon me? Do you like the proposal of the Park Board and Recreation Commission for the park the green space down
Yes.
there? Because that's $71 million that is not in the Rouse Commission proposal. Lots of people think those are all rolled together, and they're not.
And they're not, yeah. Well, I think perhaps maybe not $71 million worth of green space, but we certainly need to have some green space down there.
Okay. You are a realtor.
Yes.
A major initiative of Roxanne Qualls, who is going off of council because she's term limited out, has been higher home ownership. You know, the claim that we have abnormally low home ownership here. Is that a theme that, first off, you're committed to and you would pick up once Roxanne leaves and continue? Is this an important issue that you think we ought to continue?
Yes, and it would be a priority. As a realtor, you know, I understand that the home ownership rate here is 38%, lowest in the nation. But what we have to understand is, and that's a low amount, but what you have to really understand is, in order for that percentage point to go up, you really have to have about 1,000 more housing for it to even go up to 39%. But the one thing I think we need to do, we need to have a replication of City-Rama, but to use infill housing. And what I mean by that is the city has a lot of vacant property and a lot of vacant lots that are sitting around. Instead of having them just sit there or having the buildings that are eyesores in different communities just torn down, we can either rehab them to make them affordable housing for people to buy, for the working men and women, or we can take, if they can't be rehabbed, then we can take it down.
Pat, what about that proposal? Another proposal that's been out there is light rail. How do you feel about the housing effort? How do you feel about light rail?
On the housing effort, I'm very concerned about increasing home ownership. But I think the way to do it is to deal with the basics. I think, you know, we have a simple proposal, which to completely get rid of the city property tax, and we can do that if for the next
completely get rid of the city property tax.
What I'm talking about, Dan, is the portion that goes to the city government, not that goes to the schools,
okay,
not that goes to the county. That's about $28 million. For example, since the first of the year, council spent $17 million in these pork projects we talked about. If city government for the next 5 years says we'll keep increasing city spending to the rate of inflation, we could completely get rid of that city property tax today. I think you do that, you start dealing with providing better basic city service, then you get people to move back to the city.
Okay. We're out of time, and I've got two other candidates coming on. Thank you very much, and we'll see you November 2nd at the Board of Elections, but probably before that, too.
Thank you.
Good luck. Stay tuned. After the break, two more non-incumbents, Forrest Buckley and Diane Goldsmith. Welcome back. I am now joined by Diane Goldsmith, a Republican candidate who is making her third run for council. Diane is an experienced hand at City Hall as an assistant to Guy Guckenberger when he was on council, and is now the assistant to Tom Nyer at the Hamilton County Commission. Forrest Buckley is a Democratic candidate for council, making his second race. Forrest is a retired Cincinnati firefighter who served for years as the Firefighters Union president. Both of you, welcome back to Newsmakers. You've been here before.
Thank you.
Diane, if you're elected to council, what is it that you think, what will be your top priority? What is it that you'll go in there with and say, this is what I'm going to push for? This is my top agenda.
Well, as far as an issue is concerned, I've become more and more interested in the issue of the schools, in the importance of the schools in terms of really an economic development issue, because people are leaving this city. That's not the only reason, but it's the reason I hear most often is because of the schools. So I think council can no longer say that this is not something we need to address. So
I got to ask you a question. Lots of people running for council are talking about the schools this year. But council doesn't run the schools directly. There is a school board. What can council do? It's okay to be concerned.
Right.
What can you do?
Well, first of all, I think we need to begin a dialogue. I read a recent report from UC about home ownership, strategies for home ownership in the city. And it's in the report they said the relationship between the city and schools is abysmal. And that until that relationship is built upon, till that relationship strengthens, that we will continue to have problems with people leaving the city and home ownership.
Well, that's interesting because the home ownership question, of course, has been an issue for Roxanne Qualls and other members of council who point out the 38% home ownership figure, which we could talk about in another context. So, okay, so you're linking schools to home ownership and to economic development.
Right, and just from a personal viewpoint of personally being involved with our schools as mentors, I'd like to see all those council members over there working with the kids in school.
Okay. Forrest, if you're elected, what is it that would be your top priority, the agenda item that you would bring to council?
Well, I think you can classify it as an issue, Dan, but my biggest concern, and what I've talked about on the stump, is what I perceive as a crisis of confidence that exists between the citizens of the city and city council. So I would look at consensus building. And Diane struck on a good point about dialogues, and I think we need to really establish a dialogue with the county commissioners. It's been tried, but it wasn't successful. I think you need to work harder at that. I think we need to establish a dialogue with our neighbors across the river in southeastern Indiana and other places. But
that gets talked about again all the
Right,
time by
right,
lots
right.
of people. What would you do concretely to change that?
Well, I would try to get a majority of council, again, consensus building, to sit down and really establish a real dialogue, a meaningful dialogue on a timely basis. But the fact of the matter is, at least as I see it, until we can bring back some kind of sense of confidence and a little sense of respectability and dignity with regard to council and the people that council serves, we're going to be hard-pressed to get some of the things done in this town that we want to get done.
One of the issues that you're hinting at, and if you heard my setup at the beginning of the show, one of the things that happens all the time is people look at council and they see everybody fighting with each other, or seemingly fighting with each other, or at least not getting along, or competing, or whatever it is. I think that's what you're talking about. One of the things that Democrats have done this year, it hasn't gotten much attention, is you have a common platform. Now, I've read that platform. I'm not sure it means anything. Does that platform move you any place towards getting where you want to go?
Frankly, not so much. I mean, I'm not opposed to having a platform, and I think there are some good things in that platform with regard to labor, with regard to neighborhoods and other things, but it's a basis, it's a building block to work off of. We're not talking out of school when we talk about the Democrats not working together on city council. Part of that is an attempt to try to draw us together in a common bond to try to go in the same direction. And it's sorely needed, but it has to go beyond the Democrats on council, because certainly there's not going to be 9 Democrats on council. I'd like to see that, but that's not going to be the case. But the fact of the matter is, we got to start looking beyond our political affiliations in this town, because we have too many problems we have to confront. If we do that, they're not going to get solved.
Diane, candidates have a wonderful opportunity. It becomes a cliche. Candidates are out there listening. But in fact, having been on the trail and working with candidates, I know you have a chance to talk to lots of people. What is it that maybe you're hearing this year from voters that surprises you, or that strikes you as maybe more intense than you had expected? What is it that has caught you off guard this year?
Nothing. I can't think of anything that's caught me off guard. I think people are well aware of council's, the problems with council in terms of their spending, and that's one of the criticisms I've had, that I believe there's not a real fiscal responsibility exhibited
Specifically
by council.
about the special projects that were funded in the last budget?
Well, it's that you have a reserve. It doesn't mean you have to spend it. Now, they called it a surplus in the media, but it was a reserve, and now we have problems with our streets not being repaired, and this is in every neighborhood, problems with infrastructure, and that money that was in the reserve could have been spent once they let it be known that we were not keeping up with our goal of so much money a year for street repairs and maintenance. And so that a reserve should have been held and pending an emergency, which I believe infrastructure is an emergency if it's not maintained properly.
Related to that, there's been this discussion about whether or not to roll back the increase in taxes due to the increase in the value that is been put on homes right now. Did you support that rollback of taxes, which
Yes.
wasn't necessary in the city of Cincinnati?
Yes.
So you think that taxes could have been rolled back, there still would have been a reserve to
Of
do the
course,
basic issues?
Of course. Yesterday, or last night, I was watching cable, and again, they were talking about spending some money outside of the budget process. The issue of process, I have a problem with that as well in terms of how council has seemed to not follow the process for discussing issues, for spending money. There is a budget process. There's a committee process. In the 80s, when I was there, every council member made sure they were at the committee meetings because that's where business was discussed.
Yeah.
And then on Wednesday,
Things were taken care of.
taking care of business then.
Forrest, your experience with the city was you were a firefighter. Nitty-gritty, basic service. Do you agree that the city over the last, I don't know, few years, decade, whatever, has let those basic services, no, I'm not talking about firefighting alone or just police or firefighting, I'm talking about road repair. Do you agree that those budgets have been allowed to dwindle?
Well, we know for sure that that's happened with regard to the amount of money that they need to spend to keep the streets up. I've got a concern about streets. Some of the same things that Diane's talking about maintaining our infrastructure goes beyond streets. There's a concern that I have that the city has to play an integral part in making sure MSD, who's owned by the county, does a good balancing act in making sure that our sewage problems are taken care of in the city, when I know that we're looking at development in western Hamilton County and spending monies out there. Those are critical issues. But I think by and large, the city's maintained basic services if you look at fire and police and garbage collections, those kinds of things. But
So it's more the street area.
Sure, infrastructure, but infrastructure is so important. I mean, it's so important. We can't operate well in this town if we don't have a viable and good repair infrastructure. And frankly, you know, when you go out on the stump, you ask Diane if she had been taken by surprise with anything, and I would react the same way she did. There's no big surprise out there, but I think what we tend to forget as people seeking public office is that the average citizen out there is not looking at that new neighborhood that they want to build down on the riverfront, which I have a real problem with, or the expansion of the convention center. They're looking at maintaining streets, getting their garbage picked up when it's supposed to,
Day-to-day
having a
things.
police, right, and because that's the life that...
Okay, let me just shift because I'm aware of time
Sure.
here. What about some of those big ticket items, those investment items, convention center, the new neighborhood on the riverfront, the Rouse Commission report, the park that's been proposed, which is $71 million, on top of the Rouse proposal? People don't realize those are two different things because the drawings all look the same. Where do you stand on those?
Well, I believe that we have to expand the convention center. I'm not so sure that we have to double the size of the convention center. But we're looking at a lot of mega projects, and we've got that.
So you support convention center?
I support convention center.
What about the Rouse Commission?
I have real deep reservations. We have many neighborhoods that are at risk in this town that we need to address as opposed to building a new neighborhood. It's not going to have any schools in it, not going to have those things. And it's going to be high-end living. We just have too many neighborhoods that need to be rescued before we build a new neighborhood on the riverfront.
Diane, what about those big capital investment items?
Well, I think for the convention center, we do need to expand. I believe what the Chamber of Commerce says, what all the economists say who have studied this issue, that if we're going to do all this work on the riverfront, we're going to do all this revitalization of downtown, it would be kind of silly not to have a convention center that brings large conventions here so they can spend their money on all these things that we're revitalizing. It seems to go together. I think as far as the riverfront goes, we need to prioritize. I mean, we're obviously going to have the stadiums.
Right.
We're going to have the park.
Hasn't been funded yet, though.
I see it as a state park. We're hoping that the
State park, okay.
State park.
All right.
Park. And we're going to have the Underground Railroad.
Right.
And this Fort Washington Way,
Already
the restructuring in the parking. I mean,
what about the Rouse Commission with the thing that Forrest was talking
well,
about?
I support the Rouse Commission's report, but we need to, now I know right now they're studying, I know the county is, the budget department and the administration is looking at the options that have been presented for funding. Now what I'd like to see is a report that ultimately will come that will say, give an evaluation of each funding option. I mean, I like to look at what the administration has to say with their expertise about funding options. I believe ultimately it'll be a prioritizing issue.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much. We're going to be hearing a lot more from you between now and November 2nd. See you the night of November 2nd at the board. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, we continue the election preparations. Be here. Have a good week.